Okay. I the Geshashi Chiver once they had a sketch in which they someone asked a question that was not what they would call the greatest question. So I said, Zot she'ela ma'od she'elatit. That's a very questiony kind of question. So, and that's a shira ma'od ma'od shiratit. That's a very songy kind of song, but it was very cute. And we start baseball season during Pesach, so I guess that's a very appropriate introduction. So thank you for that uplift, because I'm going to be downlifting the rest of this hour. So, the thing, I don't be too offended, be a little bit offended, but not too offended that you're muted, because I don't want to hear people having phone calls and answering the door, which we end up hearing when calls are unmuted, when Zooms are unmuted. But I will give you the opportunity, to have some Q&A as well, so you'll to have a chance to have your voices heard um, in the course of our hour. So I'm going to use as my focus, because I want my main focus to be the 10th chapter of Pesachim in the Mishnah, which in a sense is the very first Haggadah, because it really outlines the ritual of Erev Pesach in a very, very specific way. And much of what's there is really becomes the Haggadah. If you look at early Haggadot, and we have from the Cairo Geniza, Haggadot that were, almost 2,000 years old, like the very first Haggadot, one could say, because in the period of the Batei Mikdash, the period of the temples, there was no such thing as a Haggadah. What was the Passover? What was the Erev Pesach? You brought the korban, you brought the behema, and you shechted it and you ate it, and did what you had to do with it. It was actually the act of offering the sacrifice and consuming the portions that you were able to consume. So it was not, and eating maror. There were other things you did, but there was no liturgy attached to it. So that really likely begins in the period of the Mishnah. Well, we know it begins in the period of the Mishnah, like in the probably, Mishnah is 200 BCE to 200 CE. It's a 400-year period. So it's certainly in the second half of that period of history, that's when that's when the Passover ritual, as we know it, is created, and the beginnings of the formulation of the Haggadah, which probably is not going to really exist until the period around Bar Kokhba, middle of the 2nd century CE, because the sages that are mentioned in the Haggadah, and we'll see some of them tonight, they are all people they were rabbis who lived like between the years 100 and 150, approximately, maybe a little bit before that, but that was really their lifespan. That's their era. So it's the second half of the Tannaitic period, but it's well before the period of the Talmud, and the very, very earliest stages of the development of rabbinic Judaism. So there was the ritual again is relatively late in those terms, but it's not. It's obviously not late in terms of the 21st century. So let me I want to do a little screen share for a little while and look at a text with you, which will be the framework for what I want to discuss. Let me just find this. Okay. Try something. One second, sorry about this. Having a technical issue. Oh, good. Okay, fixed it. There we go. Ooh, that's a relief. Now, basically the 10th chapter, the whole Mishnah of Pesachim, of course, dealing with Pesach. Pesachim is the plural of Pesach, and the word Pesach was the sacrifice that was offered. The Korban Pesach, that's where the tractate gets his name. The various the chapters, the Mishnah, basically each chapter deals with various aspects of of Pesach, and the last chapter, in a sense, is the one that's the most relevant to us. Basically, the first um, the first chapter deals with the search for chametz. That's still relevant. And the second chapter is the destroying, the nullification, the destruction of chametz. Um, Third chapter, baking of matzah, and fourth chapter, the customs of Erev Pesach, and then chapters 5 to 9 deal with the Passover sacrifice. So that has historical interest, but not practical relevance post temple times. And but it does include what happens with the sacrifice when Pesach falls on Shabbat, etc. Eating of the Paschal lamb. These are the things that are dealt with in those intervening chapters. And chapter 9 deals with the interesting issue of Pesach Sheni, the delayed Passover observance for those who were not ritually pure during the month of Nisan. They had a chance a month later in the month of Iyar to bring the Passover sacrifice. And now Pesach Sheni is more symbolic as opposed to being a practical day, because we don't bring the sacrifice anymore. And that brings us to our chapter, the 10th chapter, which of course is the essence of the Haggadah. And most of it you have on the screen now. I just want to look at a couple of points with you, and that will again be the framework for the things that I want to talk about. And it's all, so the very first Mishnah, by the way, the Mishnah is a great thing to study. If you're not really ready to study Talmud, which is very complex and difficult and largely in Aramaic. So if you know Hebrew, it doesn't mean you know Aramaic. So the text of the Mishnah is almost entirely in Hebrew and very clear and succinct Hebrew. So it's an easier text to study in its original language. And it basically is very to the point. And it is the basis, of course, of the Talmud. The Talmud basically incorporates the Mishnah with the discussions and debates in the academies that were responding to the Mishnah. So the very first Mishnah of the 10th chapter tells us the following: that Arvei Sachim Samuch LeMincha, that on the eve of Pesach, which this year falls on Shabbat, which is complicated. You know, Erev Pesach is complicated enough, but being on Shabbat, it's much more complicated, because a lot of the stuff you normally would do Erev Pesach, you have to do Friday, and some of it even Thursday. Fast of the firstborn, by the way, which would take place Erev Pesach normally, can't happen on Shabbat, and our tradition does not allow fasting on Friday. There is never a fast day on Friday. Yom Kippur can never fall on Friday. The reason is actually very compassionate, because we're not allowed, we're never given a situation where we're not able to cook 2 days in a row, because you obviously can't cook on you can't do on a fast day, and you can't cook on Shabbat. So you have 2 days where that's considered to be too difficult. So therefore, there's never a fast on Friday. So the fast of the firstborn is postponed is presponed. It's advanced to Thursday prior to Pesach. Interesting, by the way, I just learned this week, I didn't know this before, that when this situation happens, Sephardic Jews just dispense with the fast altogether. They say, forget about it. No fast of the firstborn. You're exempt, because you can't fast on Shabbat, which is Erev Pesach this year. So Ashkenazim don't like to make things easy. So they say, no, you're going to fast, but you're going to do it 2 days early. Of course, we do the siyum, we do the exemption study in the morning. So most firstborn become exempt from the fast. But interesting, sometimes there are many reasons around Pesach why there's an advantage to being Sephardic. If you accept the Ashkenazi prohibition of kitniyot, of legumes, then Sephardim don't deal with that. So it makes life easier as well. Okay, but that's too much of a digression. All the digressions are a lot of fun. So Erev Pesach, which falls on Shabbat this year, around one may not eat until night falls. One doesn't eat until nightfall. So what's the point? And that, by the way, that law applies not just to Pesach, it's every Erev Shabbat and Yom Tov. You're not supposed to have a major snack 20 minutes before Shabbos, or half an hour, or an hour before Shavuos or Sukkot or something. You're not supposed to, because the reason we're told about Pesach is that you should be able to eat the matzah betava, with appetite, which actually really means with lust. You have to lust after the matzah. The example is given in one, or at least one source, that it basically is compared to the reason why traditionally a bride and groom would not see each other 1 week before the wedding. Some traditions 1 day before the wedding, but usually 1 week before the wedding, they wouldn't see each other. And we know in many communities that's practiced to this day. That's why in many traditional shuls, the ofruf is not the Shabbos before the wedding, if the wedding's on the Sunday, but the week before, because the bride and groom are not going to see each other that entire week, and they see each other at the Badekan right before the ceremony. And the same reason is given, that the reason why we don't want to be eating too close to Pesach, because you have to eat the matzah b'ta'ava with lust, but the marriage, the bride and groom have to be lusting for each other. So if they see each other every 5 minutes, they say, they just saw each other. It's no big deal. You're not, okay, so you again. But if you haven't seen each other for a week, my God, you enter with passion and with lust and enthusiasm. Only Jews would compare that to eating. So that's why we have this idea of not eating close to Pesach. And also, by the way, there's also the practice of not eating matzah, like Seder matzah, like prior to the Seder. In other words, if you eat matzah during the year, which you certainly can do, you stop Rosh Chodesh Nisan, which was this past Monday. You stop Rosh Chodesh Nisan, past Sunday, sorry. You stop, and you don't have matzah till the Seder, because again, that's part of the lust. You have to have this lust for matzah. I think it's hard to imagine a lust for matzah. I haven't really figured that out totally in real life that happens, but theoretically you could. But the idea, again, which applies to every Yontif and every Shabbos, is you shouldn't be eating right before the holy day itself, because you want to save your, you don't want to be full and you get to this, the Seder meal, I can't eat another bite. That would sort of defeat the purpose. I remember when I had Seder, I talked about it in I think in this month's in the window column, although I wrote that 5 months ago, so I kind of did, but I don't remember what I wrote, but I think I talked about my Seder at Professor Frankel, Alav Hashalom, at his house 45 years ago, whose father-in-law was the major authority of the Haggadah of the 20th century, Daniel Goldschmidt. But at that Seder, which was the most meaningful Seder I ever was at in my life, but it lasted until 4 o'clock in the morning, and we didn't see food till 2:30 in the morning. At midnight, Rabbi Professor Frankel pointed out that he doesn't follow the custom that you have to eat by midnight. And obviously, those of us who were guests that Seder were all fainting from hunger already, until we got to the eating of the food at 2:30. At that point, we didn't even care what the food was. But okay, but the idea is, again, you want to enter, you want to hunger for the matzah. And that's part of the reason of not eating close to dark. That's one of the major reasons given. But there's also the idea that why do you have to say such a, why do you say such a thing? Also because we're told, those who are historians of the ancient period, the Roman period, said that people who were wealthy, the aristocracy, tended to eat their dinners early. They would have it would be early, like mid to late afternoon, they would have their evening meal early. I guess they thought it was the advance of the early bird special, but that was the practice of the elite, the wealthy people. And at Pesach, we're emulating those who are wealthy, those who are free nobility. That's the idea. That's why we recline, like we're living in luxury. We have the idea of being nobility. And that's the reason why there is this sense of wanting to emulate the aristocracy. And the practice of aristocracy was to eat early. So basically, in this case, that you didn't want to, you didn't want to, you wanted to not, you didn't want to, basically, if you're emulating the wealthy, you want to be able to, have your early meal as they would have. There's the the example we have of Agrippa, King Agrippa, whose practice was normally to eat at the 9th hour, which was the late time of mincha, and but on Erev Shabbos and Yom Tov, he would not eat then. He would wait till it was after dark because he didn't want to be entering Shabbat or Yom Tov having eaten. And also we're told that if you were invited to a festive meal, not as Jews, but as anybody in the Greco-Roman world, the invitation went out for the 9th hour, which was the time of mincha. So that's why here we're told that basically it should be before that you, if you kind of a snack before, but not that point or thereafter. Okay, and we now enter the second part of this mission. Is very simple and straightforward, that Ani Shabi Yisrael, a poor person, eats while reclining. In other words, the language is kind of like twisted and it's negative in the way it's phrased. Ani Yisrael lo yochal ad yasev, that he doesn't eat until he's reclined. In other words, basically it's saying in a positive sense that even the poor person emulates a wealthy person when it comes to the Seder and eats like a noble, like nobility. And even the person who is poor still has to have 4 cups of wine, even from community charity. So one has to ensure that people who can't afford the wine, that it's provided for them. That is a rather significant piece of social legislation. As an addendum to that, in the Haggadah, there's the opening declaration that we say, Kol Yitvin Yetev Yechu, whoever, he who is hungry, one who is hungry, come in and eat, that invitation. And scholars say that actually wasn't really part of the Haggadah, that normally the Haggadah, some even say the Haggadah begins with Manish Tana and begins with the narrative that follows. But the idea here of the invitation, it clearly had to be extended before you actually begin the Seder. That's pretty late to send out an invitation once you're sitting with the Haggadah at the table. You've already made Kiddush. I mean, it's kind of a peculiar time to be sending out an invite. That people would be insulted if they get invited to attend a reception, but you're coming before the 3rd course. So it's clearly a formulaic invitation again, but it's suggesting that invite has to be delivered ideally before the Seder takes place. It's not that all who are hungry are welcome, but that invitation had to be extended earlier. So I'm going to take a pause break now. I'm going to unshare and see if anyone wants to wave a hand or has a question. And you can unmute yourself if you have a question or comment on anything I've said so far. Okay. So let me, am I missing anyone? Okay. So,
Rabbi.
Okay, okay, go ahead, Marion.
Yeah, I misunderstood. When you go for the firstborn, it's the morning of the first Seder.
Well, normally, but not this year, because it falls on Shabbat.
But I thought after they have breakfast, aren't they absolved from their fast, or till the Seder?
You can't even have a theoretical fast on Shabbat. You cannot have a fast, because theoretically, if they don't go to the Siyum, and not every firstborn is going to go to a Siyum, and they won't be exempted, you're not allowed to have a fast day on Shabbat. Yom Kippur is the only day you can actually fast on Shabbat. That's set. But there's no...
They're supposed to fast the whole day till they have the Seder at night.
It would be not a Yom Kippur fast. It would be a daytime fast, like Ta'anit Esther, which we just had. The fast of Esther, which starts at the crack of dawn. And then, so it's like it's not a 25-hour fast. It's like I guess it's 16 or 18-hour fast, 16 hours.
Okay.
The daytime. But so a fast cannot be designated on Shabbat except for Yom Kippur. So okay, there's one other exception I'll tell you in a second. For that reason, Sephardim just say forget about it altogether, which is probably the smart decision. Ashkenazim say no, we'll do 2 days early. So Thursday, we're going to, prior to, so Pesach doesn't begin until Saturday night. So Thursday, we're going to have the theoretical fast of the firstborn, which is not theoretical if the firstborn does not attend the siyum.
Okay.
There is one other I would give you a prize to anybody who would know the other case where a fast is permitted on Shabbat besides Yom Kippur. There's one other situation. It's not a national fast. It's an individual fast. It's called a ta'anit chalom, a dream fast. If you have a nightmare, there was a practice of fasting when you wake up from the nightmare for the day, because the belief was that the nightmare was caused to force you to do tshuva, that you had done something wrong, you had sinned, and so you do a repentance fast, like a personal Yom Kippur kind of thing, as soon as you wake up. The morning you wake up, and you had a nightmare, you fast. That fast is allowed on Shabbat, because it was considered to be so dangerous that the Kadosh Baruch Hu had to send you a message that you messed up and you better get your act together, and you have to fast to seek forgiveness. So that could not be postponed. Other fast days when they fall on Shabbat, for example, Tisha B'Av, when the 9th of Av falls on Shabbat, which it can, the fast is postponed to the next day. It's postponed to the Sunday. And so you actually fast on the 10th of Av, if the 9th of Av falls on Shabbat. So it's not Tisha B'Av anymore. It's Asiri B'Av, but no one calls it that. But but the only exception besides Yom Kippur is the bad dream fast, the Ta'anit Chalom. This fast can't take place on Shabbat, so the Sephardim say don't fast altogether, and the Ashkenazim say 2 days earlier. Okay, let's go back to some Tanya. Was anybody? Now, okay, let me share a bit. Let me screen share again. 1 second.
Rabbi?
Yeah, please.
Yeah, just if you aren't attending a siyum, could you just repeat when is the conclusion of the fast of the firstborn? Like, for instance, on Thursday, it's not really Shabbat; it's a regular day.
It would be basically after Mariv.
So Mariv, whenever you do
basically,
Mariv,
as soon as the 3 stars are out.
I'm sorry, as soon as what?
3 stars.
Oh, okay, all right.
At nightfall.
Right.
Not twilight, not the, but at the actual Tzeta Kochavim, the actual emergence of stars when it's totally dark. So now that would be around this time of year. It's about 7:15. This week it's 7:15, 7:20. By the time we're doing this, it will be like you're talking close to 7:30. Mm-hmm. If you actually don't go to the siyum or go online to the siyum, and you have a choice. You probably go to 1,000 different siyums. They're all taking place online. They're all virtual now this year, so it's kind of easy. You don't even have to get dressed. So you don't have to come to shul. Okay. So let's look at a couple of other things here in the early part of the Haggadah. So now we're going to look at Mishnah 2 deals with wine. And I want to just say a bit about wine before we go further. What is fascinating is that we know that there are, we have the idea of 4 cups of wine. It's not totally clear why it's 4 cups of wine. And the explanation that we always hear, the 4 words of redemption that occur in Parshat Bo, that the 4 different Hebrew words that deal with God redeeming us, V'kafti, V'titzalti, V'tzeiti, Galti, whatever, there are 4 different words of freedom that occur, and those relate, that's why there are 4 cups. But scholars suggest it was the other way around. There was the concept of 4 cups, and then later those words were added to give it scriptural connection, but that basically the chicken here came before the egg, and it was the idea of 4 cups existed prior to connecting it to these 4 words in the Torah. Now, the idea, and basically the 4 cups were connected to parts of the ritual that require wine, like blessings that require wine. It wasn't just the idea, let's just have 4 cups of wine because that's a nice idea. No, there were times when you actually, for example, there are times where ritual demands a cup of wine. When you have these, say, the blessings at a brit milah, at a wedding under the chuppah, there are various times where there are blessings that have to be said that require wine in order for them to be said. So at the Seder, you have Kiddush, you have the conclusion of the reading of the Haggadah, which has a bracha, and the blessing of redemption. And then you have Birkat HaMazon, which traditionally was said over a cup of wine, and to this day is traditionally, and the conclusion of the Hallel, which was also said over wine. So you had these 4 liturgical pieces, all involving blessings that required wine, in the structure of the Seder. So that's where the 4 cups of wine really comes from. They serve a liturgical function. So the verse we have here in the Mishnah, which is fascinating because it brings up the classical divisions between the Beit Hillel and the Beit Shammai, the schools of Hillel and Shammai. Mazgulo Kos Rishon, which the opening tells us a couple of things of history from those words in the Hebrew. In the translation here, which is a good translation, when they have mixed the first cup of wine. The first cup of wine is, in other words, wine wasn't just poured out of a Carmel wine bottle and into a glass. It wasn't poured out of or some of the more vintage wineries that exist today, some of the better wineries that exist today. But let's say, I didn't say Manischewitz, but it's not. It didn't come from the bottle that you got at the liquor commission right to the table. It was a thick syrup that was mixed with water. It was diluted. That's the mazgu. Limzog is to mix 2 things. So it was mixed together. So you had a servant here who was mixing it for the officiant and mixing the first cup of wine. In other words, taking wine and diluting it. It's kind of like when, the old fountain soda, the fountain Coke, for example, that we go to, you go to a place such as things are open today. You go to a place and, where you're getting a soft drink, soda. That's what they said in Montreal. Here you say pop, right? Here you say pop. I had 40 years. I haven't adjusted to that yet. I lived in New York where it was soda. So it's fountain Coke. The machine dilutes, mixes syrup with water. That's exactly what happens at the Seder table here. So the first cup of wine is mixed. So we learned a bit about sociology. It wasn't just poured, it was mixed at the time. I guess that made it really fresh. And so then, of course, the question is, we have to have an argument about what is the order of the blessings. There's no debate as to the 2 blessings that are said over the wine. And this is the Kiddush drinking of wine. So the first drinking of wine, the first cup at the Seder. So that's why I said Kos Rishon, the first cup. It's obvious in the text. So we know that we had to say 2 blessings. One is called the blessing over the wine, Birkat HaYayin, and the other is Kiddush Hayom, the sanctification of the day. When one makes Kiddush, by the way, and if you learn anything tonight, if anything stays with you, let it be this, that when you make Kiddush, you're not blessing the wine. People say make the blessing over, you are saying a bracha over the wine. That's the bracha you say when you drink wine. If you drink wine Thursday morning for breakfast, I'm not recommending that, but if you drink wine, unless you're French, if you drink wine Thursday morning for breakfast, you say Borei Pri Hagafen, then you drink the wine. That's the bracha you're making in order to be able to drink wine, but you're not blessing the wine. At Kiddush, whether it's Shabbat, whether it's Yom Tov, what you are doing is using the wine as a vehicle to sanctify the day. You're proclaiming the holiness of the day, and wine is the vehicle that enables you to do that. So Beit Shammai says the first thing you're going to do is say the blessing of the day. In other words, the sanctification of the day. You're going to say the sanctification of the Yom Tov, and then you're going to say Borei Pri Hagafen. And Beit Hillel says it's the opposite. First, you say Borei Pri Hagafen, the blessing over the wine, and then you sanctify the day. Then you do the blessing of the day, which of course is what we do because we always go according to Beit Hillel. That's another discussion, but we always go because Beit Hillel is the dominant school. But the fact is, of course, that the teachings of Beit Shammai are mentioned first, suggesting, as the Talmud reminds us, that we still respect their opinions. Their opinions were valued and respected, even though ultimately they were rejected. But they were, as the Talmud says, Elu ve'elu divrei Elohim Chaim. Both schools spoke the words of the living God. In other words, they spoke authentic tradition. And they nonetheless, we go with Hillel, but we respect Shammai as well. That's one of the first examples of religious pluralism that isn't followed often enough in our Jewish world today, but I will save you the sermon. So what's interesting here, of course, is we know that it's easy. We know we go according to Beit Hillel. So we first say Borei Pri Hagafen, and then we do the whole Kiddush blessing of the day. God, thanks, sanctified us, everything, the long paragraph that we say. About the day, whether it's Shabbat, whether it's Yom Tov, and then we in the Yom Tov part we specify which holiday it is. Now, the rationale here, both our sages give rationale for both schools. Basically, Beit Hillel's rationale is the only reason that you're, basically you're saying wine first because that brings it to the table. You want to bring the Kiddush to the table. And wine is the vehicle that brings it to the table. So in other words, so that's why you have an opportunity, because by the way, you also sanctify that day in Ma'ariv and in Shachrit, in the davening, you also do Kiddush Yom, you also do a sanctification of the day. On Yom Tov, it's the fourth, and on Shabbat, it's the fourth of the 7 blessings of the Amidah. Again, a regular weekday Amidah has 19 brachot. That's why it's called the 18. Of course, it's Jewish thinking. But it's on Shabbat and Yom Tov, there are 7 blessings. By the way, on the high holy days, there are 9, but that's another discussion. So the fourth of the 7, it's the fourth that's the one that's unique to the Shabbat or to the Yom Tov. That's Kiddush HaYom. So you've already done it in the Amidah. So that you want to have a chance to also do it at the meal. So wine gives us that opportunity. So Hillel says, so first bless the wine, because you have to thank the wine for allowing you to say Kiddush again at the dinner. Or for those who didn't go to Shul and Daven, or go to the Zoom and Daven before, it gives us the opportunity. So, but Beit Shammai says, no, first do the day, because otherwise you wouldn't be drinking wine altogether. So that's each one had a rationale. And the fact that we worry about a rationale for Beit Shammai, the losing school, again reflects the fact that we valued the opinions of the Shammaites, even though they weren't the dominant school, which again is an incredibly important message in today's Jewish world, where we don't see a lot of that, of valuing the opinions of those with whom we disagree. And that's not only in Jewish life, of course, it's in the world as a whole, in politics. We have such, polarity in life today that people do not respect the views of those opponents, and they become enemies as opposed to becoming, the opposition, but still, but nonetheless people with whom one respects. And I remember years ago, a long time ago, we had a major event at the shul. This is going back at least 30 years. And we had very, very high level speakers. We had cabinet ministers, we had government officials, we had, representatives of 3 levels of government. We had, our MP at the time was Bob Kaplan, Alav Shalom. And I can't remember the name of the minister we had. It will come to me before the end of the hour, probably. One was a conservative, the minister was a conservative, and of course, Kaplan was a liberal. And they came together, they were very close friends on different, that's the kind of thing you want to see, where people have division of opinion, but they can be very chummy and very close. And we don't see enough of that today in the world. But that's, the idea here of Beit Shammai being quoted with Beit Hillel is a very powerful idea, not simply because it's just curiosity to know what the other school said, but the fact that the opinions are still valued. And the Talmud even says, by the way, the reason that we go with Hillel over Shammai is not only because they don't say because their opinions were better, because they were smarter, because the Shammai people were not stupid. It's never said because they were better and and they were superior and Shammai was inferior. They say that the Hillelites were nicer. They were nice, and the fact that they went out of their way to teach the opinions of their opponents, and they were just nicer. They were more menschlich, and that's why God favored them, because it's a voice from heaven that says, "Go according to Beit Hillel," which is again a powerful idea. Okay, let me just take go off sharing for a second and see if there are questions. Before we move on, we're sort of in a switch of topic. Okay. Now, what I'm not talking about tonight, by the way, as you've probably noticed already, is whether quinoa is kosher for Pesach or not. That, by the way, historically, is the most asked question I've had in the last 7 years. Is quinoa kosher for Pesach? So my first response would be, who cares? I hate it. I mean, who wants, that's like gross. I mean, well, why would anyone care that they couldn't have quinoa for a week? The answer is it is kosher for Pesach. By the way, if anyone is waiting to ask me that question. But that's not not what I'm doing tonight, because that's stuff you can just go on the internet and find out if something is kosher for Pesach. You don't need me for that. Okay, let's go back to the Mishnah. I'm sorry, I was going to see if there were any questions. I went too quickly. Just call out if you have a question, because it's hard to see on Zoom.
Yeah, Rabbi, I have a comment.
Okay, Larry, go ahead.
Yeah, there's commentary that there were 5 cups, and the 5th cup was for Elijah.
Well, that became the 5th cup. There actually were originally in some communities, there were 5 cups, authentic 5 cups, where they did 2 for the, you break up the Hallel in 2 parts. So they would do 1 at the first point and 1 at the second point, or there may be other place they did it. So there was actually a practice of having 5 cups mamash. And there were 5 words then instead of 4 words of redemption that were used. But what ended up happening is the cup of Elijah was considered, so you didn't actually drink from a 5th cup, but the compromise was that cup on the table would be representing the 5th cup. So you're right. That's a very valid point, that it did exist as a practice of actually there being 5 cups in some communities. There was a debate, like everything has to be, we don't agree on anything, everything has to be debated, and there was a custom of there being 5 cups as opposed to 4. But I think that we like the number 4. Again, there are 4, there are 4 questions which we might get to tonight, we might not. By the way, originally there were only 3, and by the time of the Babylonian Talmud, the 3 became 4, but it was originally 3. We had the 4 sons, which originally were 3, and also became 4 because there seems to be this propensity to the number 4. And I'm not getting to the 4 sons tonight. I've taught that many times in the past, but the 4 sons are the 4 children in more contemporary language. They're really, the original text was 3 because 1 doesn't really belong with the 4, because the 3 are intellectual levels of capability, from unable to ask, sheno yidei lishol, unable to formulate a question, the tam, the simple son, the one who's not a rocket scientist, and the chacham, the one who's very wise. So you have 3 different levels of intellect. And then they bring in the 4th, which is the rasha, which is wicked, which brings in a new criterion on why there's nothing to, the first 3 have nothing to do with morality, nothing to do with whether one is good or bad, where it's not a value judgment of the person. So to bring in wicked with 3 intellectual levels, it doesn't fit, because the chacham could be wicked, the tam could be wicked, or it doesn't. So that's why it's clear that was not, there was an original source of the rasha, which was separate. And because the editors of Haggadah love the number 4, 3 becomes 4 in all these instances. So the idea of there being 5 cups, I think they wanted to bring it back down to 4, because again, for some reason, we like the number, our editors of the Haggadah like the number 4. Maybe the idea of the nuclear family, mother and father and a son and a daughter, and that sentence becomes 5 because you include the dog. But there's but there's a propensity to aim for 4 when things originally were not 4, which is fascinating. And there were 3 questions. There were 3 sons. Again, using the traditional language, the classical language, which becomes 3 children in contemporary life. Okay, so let's go back. Does anyone else? I'll pause. Let's at least cover one more idea here. 1 second. Okay.
Rabbi?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I have one more comment. There were 4 progressive steps of redemption, as mentioned by Scheim, when the Israelites are leaving Egypt.
Yeah, the Arba Lashonot Shel Geula, the 4 languages of redemption, which again, some say there are 5.
Oh, okay.
So that's also, but that
right.
Again, as I indicated before, that comes after the fact. The idea of 4 cups pre-existed, finding those words to equate with 4 cups. We often, that's often been practiced where you want to get authenticity, like the idea of certain practices that we had, like for example, the separation of milk and meat doesn't really originate with the verse Lo teva shel gedi b'chalev imo, which was basically keeping us, separating us from, and this, the Rambam Maimonides pointed this out 900 years ago, that there was a Canaanite practice, a ritual where taka, a goat, was boiled in its mother's milk as part of their pulchan, as part of their ritual practice. They would actually do that. The Torah prohibited that pagan practice. Just like the Torah says, lo tigodedu, don't gash yourself when you're in mourning, because that was a pagan practice in the ancient world. As a sign of mourning, you injured yourself. And there are some populations in the world today that I believe do that to this day. They injure themselves physically. What do? We do the kriya, the rabbinic brilliant idea of cutting our clothing. Injure your clothes, not your body. But the idea again, so the idea of the goat and the milk. So later it becomes attached to the verse of the idea of separation of milk and meat. As that evolves, becomes connected to that verse, but it's not specifically, the verse itself was not intended to have separate dishes in our kitchen, but was intended to keep us from Canaanite practice. And Maimonides already points that out, which is really interesting in terms of the history, the development of Jewish practice. So in certain cases, we look to the verse after the fact. It's not really what necessarily created the practice itself of separation. So, okay, now here we get to okay, there is a, in number 3, I'm just going to go through this very quickly, the idea of the couple of things here that come up, the idea of dipping the vegetable into a liquid. So they bring, again, the idea there's some kind of working crew, there's there are waiters, there are other people involved, there are people who are bringing to the host of the Seder, they're bringing him, it doesn't, the language, it leaves out what they're bringing. They bring something to him. And here in the English, it's bracketed, the food. And then it describes that he, the Seder officiant, takes the lettuce and dips the lettuce until the breaking of bread, until the eating of the matzah at the Seder. Now, what's interesting here is there is some speculation, this is a good point to make, there's some speculation that the entire Haggadah was recited, and then we go on to say, and then they bring the matzah and the chazeret, the charot, they bring the main course, and the charoset, which it's not a mitzvah, it's not in the Torah, but the sages adopt it, and they, there are those who say it is a mitzvah, that there's, as you see, Rabbi Tzodek says it is a mitzvah. In the Talmud, they argue that whether it's a mitzvah or not, and others say it's just for the children. Ladardike, it's to please the children because charoset tastes good, it's yummy. Then in the temple, they would bring the actual Passover sacrifice. So the question, the debate is, originally, when was the early years when there was a Haggadah? And originally the Haggadah, by the way, was very short. It wasn't as long as today's. It was pretty abbreviated. It was just a few pages. The early Haggadah that we've discovered are 6 or 7 pages. They're not long. I mean, like everything else in Jewish life, it got extended, and things get added, and poems get added, and prayers get added, etc. And the explanations, the midrash, it's amplified and it becomes a much longer ritual. But there's an interesting debate about sequencing as to at what point in time, when was the Haggadah recited, whichever version of the Haggadah it was. Some suggest it was recited after the meal. The entirety was done, like you do all the eating here, because they don't describe, there's no text here that describes anything to do with ritual other than eating, other than dipping and eating. There is no, and then we go to the next Mishnah. And by the way, the Mishnah is not, it's all consecutive, so you're not, it's one after the other. And then you get to the 4 questions, which leads to the narrative, the story, the midrash. So this suggests that Mishnah 3, which talks about the food, suggests that all the food was eaten, and then you had the Haggadah. Of course, that's not our practice. We do the Haggadah early on after we, before we get to the matzah. All we do is eat the vegetable. We dip the vegetable. We have a little bit, but we do very little consumption of food before the completion of the bulk of the Haggadah. Then we have the meal. Then we do the Birkat Hamazon, to finish the Hallel, Birkat Hamazon. But we don't. Most of the Haggadah is done before the meal, and that would be practiced, I would say, since Talmudic times. So you're talking the last 1,700 years. So it's a long time we've been doing it that way. It's not like we just started doing that in 1950. We've been doing that for most of Jewish life. But in the early centuries, probably there's a good case to be made that the whole Haggadah was recited, as the Mishnah suggests here, before we actually ate the meal. And by the way, that makes more sense of the questions that the child is supposed to be asking, because he's asking on things that haven't happened yet, if you haven't eaten the meal yet. How is the child supposed to know that every other night we eat bread or matzah or chametz? He doesn't know. You haven't had the matzah yet in our Haggadah, in our Seder. You haven't gotten to that yet. So he doesn't know. It's a child, let's say, that doesn't remember from the previous year. I have that problem not remembering what I did last week, but that's another issue. But you have the idea of how is the kid supposed to know to ask these questions, and that you eat all of it tonight. We eat maror. I mean, this stuff hasn't happened yet. He's asking these questions before you get to the maror, and they're talking about the various meat varieties that you normally would eat. What meat you're having at the Seder? You haven't seen meat yet, unless you went to inspect the kitchen before the. So it's kind of curious that this particular text suggests that the child has a vision of what's going to happen. It hasn't happened yet. So the fact that originally the Haggadah was done after after the food was consumed kind of makes sense. The problem with that is, how do you do a long Haggadah after you've eaten the big meal? Do you know how hard it is to stay awake during after you've had a gesund Seder meal? It's very hard to stay awake for the conclusion of the service. I remember when we used to do congregational Seders at Beth David in my first couple of years. So we're going back 40 years. That was probably 50 years ago, or 50, 60 years ago that practice started. And the late Rabbi Pappenheim would lead the Seder. And the 2 years that I was there, for 2 or 3 years that we had one when I was there in the early 1980s, before we canceled it, the attendance was 95% non-members of the shul. Very few members of the shul. That's one of the reasons why we stopped it. Because we weren't, we're basically expending the energy of clergy, not for our members who weren't interested in the congregational Seder. But what I remember distinctly from the 2 Seders that I attended, with the late Rabbi Pappenheim was leading, was the fact that after the meal, 90% of the crowd left. And they weren't shul people. So I'm sitting there with Rabbi Pappenheim with 3 members of the shul that were there, and the room was empty. It cleared out for the conclusion of the Seder. So that may be the reason why the practice changed in the rabbinic period to do the Haggadah not after the meal, but before the meal. But clearly there is logic to suggest that it should have been done, that it would make sense in a way to do it after the Haggadah, to eat after to do the Haggadah after you eat first. And then the problem then is, I think practical life tells us that it's hard to concentrate for hours on a full stomach. I mean, basically, it's difficult because you get sleepy. You know, and it's hard to stay awake after, you know, unless you have a very skimpy Seder, which is not the intent. You're supposed to eat nicely. So well, a couple of other points I'm going to raise about then I'm going to just open to questions about the questions here. This point I've mentioned in the past, those who remember from previous years. Masgulo koshenia, now the second cup of wine is poured. And what's interesting here is that this wine will not be consumed until right before the meal. It's not going to be consumed. If it's a long Seder, it could be not consumed for 2 hours. If it's the Seders that people used to have in Montreal when I was growing up, when it was the Stanley Cup playoffs, and people wanted to do the Seder in half an hour, Professor Ruth Weiss writes a great article about Montreal Seders and how that was the idea. They called it the Super Seder, when it was always the Canadiens were always in the playoffs. It was always the Stanley Cup finals. You didn't have 400 teams then. And early April were the finals, and everyone was rushing to get to the television. I was never a hockey fan, so it didn't interest me, but people were running to the TV. So that was, but the other than, you know, so the Seder was quick then, but in a traditional Seder, it's a long time. So here you're pouring the second cup of wine. You're not going to drink it for a long time. Why are you pouring it now? And it's very specific to the V'kan Paven Shoel Aviv, because you want the child to ask the father a question. The question you want him to ask, of course, is Manish Tana, why is this night so different? So far, he doesn't know that it's different. And he's not going to know the other stuff because it's not going to happen yet. But how does he know it's different now? Because normally, when is the second cup of wine at a Yontiv meal? It's before the Birkat HaMazon, after the meal is over. Here you're pouring the second cup of wine, you haven't eaten yet. Of course, if you went back to the original version, then you would have eaten, so then it would be different. But here he's, in this case, you know, since the Talmudic period, where this, you know, the idea is that it's pouring the second cup of wine out of sequence, like earlier, way before you need it, is going to provoke a question, because normally there are only 2 cups at a festive meal or a Shabbos meal, beginning before the meal and after the meal. Here you're doing it, you say you're pouring a cup of wine and you haven't had the meal yet, so it's out of sequence. So the kid's going to say, why are you pouring the cup of wine now? And the father then is supposed to say, ask a good question, and then go into the answer. But it says very interesting here, the child is not perceptive to the change in sequence, doesn't respond to that cue, that visual cue. Aviv Melamdo, the father prompts him, the father teaches. Then you have the Manish Tana text, with which we're familiar, even though this is a version that differs somewhat from our Haggadah. But nonetheless, the intent in the Mishnah is that ideally you wouldn't have to say this, that you wouldn't have to say these, you know, this recitation of Manish Tana, because the kid would have already asked the question. All the kid had to do was say, what's so special about tonight that you're pouring wine now? We haven't eaten yet. And funny that you asked. This is why tonight is so special. And then you go on to the rest of the Haggadah. You don't have to, you can save 5 lines. And if the kid didn't do that, didn't respond to the cue, was too focused on Instagram or whatever kids are focused on today, at that point, Aviv Melamdo, the parent, coaches. And what you have here is a prompting text. But already by the time of the Talmud, this again is, let's say, approximately the year 100, 150, where this is composed. Already 300 years later, by the Talmudic period, 200 to 300 years later, this became ritualized. So this actually became a text that was recited as ritual. And even we're told that if you have 2 sages that are sitting by themselves at the Seder, together, 2 great scholars that are all old people, that are both old, and they ask each other. In other words, the ritual, so these questions became actually part of the liturgical experience of the eve of Passover. They became they became part of the ritual, and that was, you know, so it was too beloved a formulation with nice melodies attached to it later on, that this wasn't just going to be a prompting text that may or may not be used. So it became actually part of the text a couple of hundred years into its existence. But originally that wasn't the intent. It was just there in case the father needed a guide to help his son or his child who was oblivious to the differences of the evening. But it's a very, again, it's a beloved part of the Seder, but it's also a very important part because it suggests that the success of the experience will only come when we are able to excite a younger generation to want to learn from a previous generation, to want to learn from those who come before. That's really the beauty of the text, because it is the idea to say that if we haven't inspired the younger generation, then we've missed the boat. It's not just, and there's some way that they say this is really meaningful. And that, by the way, can happen even at a Seder that is not necessarily a full 9-yard, hugely traditional Seder that's going to last to the early hours of the morning. If it's one that's going to be done, a little more loosely. And I think during time of COVID, most of us are not doing the 7-hour Seders anymore. It's not by choice, but maybe 7 hours may not be a choice, but you may want to do a lengthy Seder with a lot of guests. That's not possible. Last year, it's not going to be possible. This year, God willing, next year, it'll again be possible. But we are limited by circumstance, by situation. But whatever we do, even if it's minimalist, and it's okay to be minimalist under these circumstances, we want to somehow ignite a spark among the younger people. I'm really happy that I'm here. I'm really delighted that I'm part of this Zoom, whatever it is, or whether I'm connected somehow, because this connection with tradition has meaning, because it means so much to those who are, who've taught me, those who are celebrated with me, whether virtually or in or my own family who are together. So that's still, whatever we do, minimal or maximal, it's that idea of lighting that spark. And that's the whole idea of the questions, the 4 questions, that the child had to be motivated to be interested in what's going on. And even though the text that follows is rather obscure and difficult and could be kind of boring for a child and sometimes for an adult, that's why it's great to have conversation on topics of interest too that relate to Jewish life, not just about the Blue Jays or the Raptors. They should be doing better. Nonetheless, it's something that that suggests the entire purpose of what we're doing here. I believe that I believe that Lorraine, I saw come on. Am I correct in that? You have an announcement to make? You have to unmute for a second. That's what we're trying to do. Oh, we're getting, okay. You're muted. You have to, okay, I'm asking you to unmute. Okay. There we go. Okay, you're live. You still can't hear you though.
Unmuted?
Now you're good. Go. Good.
Good. Okay. As I'm wearing my St. Patrick's Day green shirt, thank you for the opportunity, Rabbi Scheim. As many of you know, the National Council of Jewish Women runs an annual Passover food drive, and they annually create over 2,000 boxes of food, which are distributed both through the National Council as well as through JF&CS for the indigent community. And rather than donating a box of matzah here and a container of oil there, they've asked if we could, in supporting the food drive, make cash donations this year. So if you would take a look at your events and opportunities newsletter that came out on Sunday of this week, you'll see both the phone number and the email address for National Council. And we'd very much want to encourage people to make a donation. When you make the donation, please make note that you're calling on behalf of Beth David. And our target for this food drive is to help raise $3,600 in donations for the Pesach program. The need is greater than ever this year, and they'll probably figure it out one way or the other. Thank you. But we really want to help contribute so that we can both shep nachas from our participation that we're doing a mitzvah, as well as help them reach their target, because the numbers are, as I say, greater than ever this year. So if you can, please do. And Chag Sameach, everyone.
Thank you so much, Alan, and much appreciated. I see that Cantor Loomer is still here, so if you want to do a closing song for us? Anything from the Haggadah? Muted, it's going to be.
I did the close. That was the song that I did earlier.
Yeah, but do something else. So something from the Haggadah, maybe.
You want something from the Haggadah?
Yes,
okay. Let me go get a Haggadah. Okay. I'm going to teach you a song.
Okay, good. That will be a good, nice way to conclude.
So
Anna has a question. Her hand is up.
Okay.
Okay, so ask the question, then Marshall will do the song.
Yes. I have a question. Alan, if I've already made a donation to the food drive and Beth David doesn't get credited as part of my, what do I do?
I think the answer is to say, thank you very much, Anna, for making the donation, and we'll just have to get by. But I think, the point is that the donation has been made. We'll do our best to reach our target. But thank you so much.
That's the important part. And I'm glad I didn't have to answer the question, because it made my life, I was getting very nervous about what I was going to be asked. So, Kent, are you back?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay.
You know, in the Haggadah, many of you use this Haggadah. It's probably the one Haggadah you shouldn't use. If you're going to use a Haggadah, you're going to use one of the cheaper ones. Use the Maxwell House. Rabbi Scheim and I always joke about the Maxwell House. But
it was reprinted last year, actually.
Was it reprinted?
Yeah, you could get it on Amazon in the US. You can get it.
This Haggadah really, it's what everybody seems to have at home. But on page 10, coincidentally on line 10, there is a song called Baruch HaMakom. And what I love about the song is that it talks about how God gave us the Torah, and the Torah speaks about the 4 sons. But anyway, the whole paragraph is beautiful, but it's a one-line song. It's easy to know. Baruch HaMakom Baruch Hu, Baruch Shenatan Torah le'amo Yisrael, Baruch Hu. Very easy, right? So you're going to say Baruch HaMakom Baruch Hu. We'll do that together. 1, 2, 3, 4. Baruch HaMakom Baruch Hu. Baruch Shenatan Torah le'amo Yisrael, Baruch Hu. There you go. Something different other than Dayenu.
Beautiful. So at this point, wishing all of you a Chag Kasher B'Sameach. Prior to that, we have 2 Shabbatot, because it's an interesting year. We have a Shabbat, Erev Pesach is Shabbat, so that's a regular Shabbat, as it were, with the irregularity of not being able to have chametz, in the morning after 10:15 approximately a.m. on Saturday morning, and it's complicated to have it all together. So we suggest that you use egg matzah for motzi Friday night and Saturday, because egg matzah cannot be used at the Seder. Unless you are ill, and then by doctor's instruction, you can't use regular matzah, but it's not matzah that one uses to fulfill the requirement of the Seder. But I wish you this. Well, we do have 2 Shabbatot prior, so a little time to go, not that much, but a little time to go prior to and it's not the holiday that we've had in the past in terms of large numbers gathering for Seder, but I hope you'll still find meaning. So some of you will see it weekdays on Zoom, and we'll see you during Chol Hamoed on Zoom, and on Yom Tov we'll be doing live stream services every morning of the the 4 days of the festival, and as well. So many of you will catch us when we're live streaming. We don't see you, so we're talking to the wall, literally. At least the wall doesn't throw tomatoes or anything. It doesn't. It's not critical of us, but it is kind of weird, actually. But overall, nonetheless, you can see us. We can't see you, so you can do whatever you want. You can wear whatever you want, and I imagine you're already doing that. Just make sure on Pesach, if you're watching the service, you're eating kosher Pesach. That's important, because that God will tell us if you're not, and you'll be in big trouble. But I wish all of you should have a wonderful Yom Tov and stay healthy and stay well. And I thank all of you. A lot of you came out tonight, and you could have been doing other things. So I really appreciate that. I don't have the schedule in front of me, but the list that you get. We have Rabbi Walker and Michael Rubin doing other sessions, and Kendra Loomer is going to be joining to do little bits and pieces and songs the other nights as well, which will be wonderful too. So to all in advance, Chag Kasher v'Sameach, stay well. And thank you for joining tonight, and we look forward to seeing you.
Thank you very much. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
And feel free to email if you have questions, especially about quinoa. I really love those. But if you have any questions, don't hesitate.
You can make the quinoa taste good.
Okay, if you ask me about kishka, I can understand it.
Thank you, Rabbi.
I'm on a diet. I haven't touched kishka Rabbi. But it's.
Thank you so much, Rabbi. It was wonderful.
Thank you, guys. Take care. Be well.
Thank you. Everybody take care and stay well.
Rabbi, there is great significance between vinegar and salt water for dipping the lettuce.